My name is Abigail Knoll, and I'm one of the Senior Development Coordinators here at BioQuest for our VPBS, or BioQuest Psychiatric and Behavioral Solutions Department. So what does a development team do? The development team is in charge of bringing in new business and contracts, as well as maintaining any old business or contracts that we currently have. I wanted to be here to talk with you today about some of the nursing facilities that we're contracted with throughout the state of Ohio. Anytime you're going to be assigned to a facility or are going to be working at any of these facilities, we always want to make sure that the first thing we're doing when we get there is figuring out who that point of contact is and checking in with them. So, for example, our nursing team and our nurse practitioners, a typical point of contact for you would be a DON or a director of nursing. And then for our TBS and therapists, it's typically going to be someone like a social worker or social services director. Each time you arrive at this facility, you're going to let your contact know which residents you're planning on seeing that day. This is going to give them an opportunity to discuss any issues or concerns with those specific residents. This also gives them a chance to add any residents to the list who may have had a crisis happen overnight and really do need to be seen that day. This is also going to give you valuable information for your sessions. For example, one of the residents might have gotten into a fight with their roommate the night before or had a close relative pass away. All of that information is going to be very helpful for you to have prior to going into doing your sessions with them. One big part of creating and maintaining a caseload is being able to consent a resident for services. And while development does do a bulk of this, it's good for everyone to know how to consent or appropriately consent a resident. Just in case you're at a facility and they have a new client who came in and they want them to get services as soon as possible. No problem, we're going to get them consented. So, one of the first parts of consenting is looking at the face sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I do apologize in advance because a lot of this information is blocked out. And that is because we can't share PHI even in an interdepartmental training. So if you do have any questions about what a face sheet looks like or how to actually read it without all of the blackout squares on it, feel free to talk to your supervisor and they'll be more than happy to help. So what is a face sheet? A face sheet includes a resident's demographic information. So things like their name, date of birth, and then all of their insurance information. It's also going to notate any contacts, if they have a guardian or POA, or if they can consent for themselves. So for example, when we're looking at this resident, we would be able to see their name, their birth date, and if they have Medicaid, and see what kind of insurance they have. We can scroll down and the contact section is where you're going to be able to find out if this resident can consent for themselves or not. In this example, this resident is listed as the responsible party, relationship is self, so this resident can consent for themselves. In some situations, it might say POA or guardian, and the relationship can be anything from guardian to sister, brother, mother, daughter, aunt, so on. Whenever they have a guardian or a power of attorney, that means that we're going to need to collect the consent from the guardian or power of attorney and not the client themselves. So, for example, how are we going to get consent from someone who isn't in the facility? They have their phone number and emails listed right over here, so you go ahead and give them a call to get that consent for services. One of the other things you want to look for on the face sheet is some of the information on their diagnoses that might qualify them for services. So for example, we can see that this resident has an anxiety disorder listed. Now, in some cases, especially when it's a new resident, they might not have a diagnosis listed on their face sheet. That's completely fine. You can talk to your point of contact and figure out what symptoms or behaviors they're having that would qualify them for services. I'd say occasionally people do have quite a few symptoms and behaviors, but have just never had a formal diagnosis. So once you look through the face sheet and determine all of the important information for this resident, then you can go ahead and start the consenting process. So with that, I'm going to share my screen again, and we can look at the consent form. So there is a two parts to this consent form. We're going to go over the second part or this first part a little bit later. I want to really focus on our consent form and the bulk of what it is and how to get consent. So in this case, this resident is able to consent for themselves. So I would be able to go into that resident's room and speak to them about the services that we're asking them to consent for and go over the form with them. I always keep extra consent forms on my person because I never know who might need a consent form. Now, when I am going into a resident's room with a consent form, I am only taking this bottom section. I am never taking this top section in with me or having the resident check anything off or look at this. With that sent them, I usually say something like, "Hi, my name is Abby. I am with ViaQuest, and we're a healthcare company that is contracted with this facility to provide services to the residents. I wanted to stop by as we do have a clinician who's able to work with residents here on different goals that they like to achieve, also talk about some coping skills, and do different games and activities. We also have a nurse practitioner who's in the building who is going to be able to come by, check in on your medication, make sure that you're not having any negative side effects, and make sure that everything is just going well for you. This service is covered by insurance and there is no cost. Is this something that you're interested in?" So to consent someone for TBS, I usually say something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is Abigail Newell, and I'm with ViaQuest. We're one of the healthcare companies that are partnered here with this facility. We do have a clinician who comes in and works with residents on different goals that they would like to achieve. They'll also be able to work on things like coping skills or doing different games and activities with you, just kind of really giving you that one-on-one someone to talk to. This service is 100% covered by Medicaid, and there's absolutely no cost to you. Is this something that you'd be interested in?" Now, let's say you're consenting for medication management. You can say something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is Abigail Newell. I am with ViaQuest, and we're a healthcare company contracted to provide services to residents here. I wanted to stop by as we're the specialist for residents who are taking any type of psychiatric medication, just to make sure that the medications you're taking are working okay and you're not having any negative side effects. This service is covered by your insurance, so would it be okay for us to have our nurse practitioner stop by the next time they're in here to check in with you regarding your medications?" Now, let's say they say yes. How do we fill out this form and what do we need to go over on this form with our client? So I go ahead and would read through the form with the client or allow them to read themselves. It does depend on their comfortability level with that. So please make sure you're actually asking, is this something that you would like to read through yourself, or would you like me to read through some of these points? Billing and payment, again, this is required to be checked and to be explained. So I would say something like, just read off the sheet. "I understand that payment of all fees is due at the time of service. I authorize ViaQuest to bill my insurance and release pertinent information to my insurance carrier. I'm responsible for understanding my benefit plan and for paying all copays, deductibles, and any fees applicable not paid for insurance for any reason." Now, again, if they start to get concerned, most insurances, especially if this is a TBS only client, um, is not going to have any type of payment at all. So, something to keep in mind to help soothe some worries if any are brought up. And then I also understand that any self-pay or other arrangements will need to be handled by ViaQuest billing department. So this is going to be important if someone decides that they don't want to go through their insurance and they would like to self-pay for the services through ViaQuest. Now we would go back onto the handbook section. Again, this is required, so these all are pre-checked, but they are things that you do need to go over. I acknowledge receiving or being offered a copy of the handbook. Again, you can present a copy of the resident's handbook or the client handbook to the resident. This is something that you should have copies with on your person. If they decline, that is fine. You have to at least offer it though. The handbook provides details specifically about your rights and company notice of privacy practices and the compliant and conflict resolution process. I understand the notice of privacy practice explains how ViaQuest is permitted to use and disclose my protected health information, and that the handbook outlines the applicable policies and expectations of receiving treatment or services from ViaQuest. Again, a lot of residents might refuse the handbook. That is fine, but we do have to at least offer it to them. For communication preferences, this is not something that is required to be checked. However, you can still ask. If someone is seeming very concerned about billing or scheduling, or who's going to be contacting them about who's going to be seeing them anytime soon, you can go through and ask, would you like an email, a call, a text, whatever works best for them. Again, this is going to be non-confidential communication. So things like scheduling an appointment, changing an appointment, letting them know that maybe you're going to be out for a week on vacation or something like that. And then any confidential communications do have to go through a more private form of communication. So you can ask them if they prefer home phone, cell phone calls. You can call the work phone at the facility, use their designated mailing address, or send an encrypted email or fax. Release a photo and video. Again, not required, but you are able to check this if they give you permission. So that means that you'd be able to take pictures with this resident, working with this resident, doing activities with this resident, and then ViaQuest would be able to use that on social media, in our marketing, or on some of our newsletters that we would send out to the teams. And last but certainly not least, we have our telehealth agreement. This is only for psychiatric and behavioral solutions. And this is regarding how we conduct our telehealth. So anytime that we have someone who needs to get an assessment done really quickly, or needs medication management services, but in a more rural area, we are going to set up telehealth instead of doing in person. All of this is secure and confidential. And absolutely all of the telehealth equipment that's utilized is arranged and set up by ViaQuest, and a ViaQuest employee runs that telehealth section or session. So you'd want to go ahead and explain that and make sure that they understand what telehealth is, and that even though it would be over a computer, they are still guaranteed that confidentiality and privacy. Now that we have gone through all of that, let's focus on how to fill out the section down below. So you're going to first print the name of the individual who is being consented. So in this example, John Smith. I usually go ahead and write that in for the resident. The reason being is residents' handwriting can vary from very legible and great to sometimes not the best. And so to make it easier on our intake team and to make sure that we're putting in accurate information, I go ahead and write their name out. Again, I got this information off of their face sheet. And you're also going to put in their birth date. I go ahead and just put this in for them as well. Now, John Smith is able to give consent for himself. So we are going to look at the signature of individual served line. And let's say that John Smith is very shaky and not able to write very well, and he gives me verbal consent. I'm able to write in verbal consent given by John Smith. Now, if he wanted to sign for himself, he absolutely can go ahead and just sign John Smith without that verbal consent given by, and then you're good to go. Same thing is going to apply if you're talking to a POA or guardian. A lot of times when you're talking to a POA or guardian, it's over the phone or via email. That means that they're not able to wet sign this particular consent form. So you would write in verbal consent given by guardian Sarah Smith, right? And that would still count as a valid consent. Now, one of the most important things to note is that the date that the individual signed the consent has to match the date where you're signing on the witness line. If these dates do not match, it won't be a valid consent. So make sure that you are keeping that in mind. That is going to be very important for you. Now, again, I want to reiterate when we are going through this sheet, even if we are handing the sheet to them to sign, you are not going to be handing them the first page, which is this one. Reason being is they can occasionally be frustrated or disheartened, or angry, honestly, that this has been filled out with their symptoms. They might get defensive and might not be as agreeable to services because they might be saying, oh, I don't do that. I've never done that. However, we have, 3 staff members telling us that this is something that happens on the regular. So I usually refrain from saying anything about their diagnoses or what qualified them on their chart because, again, there is that negative stigma, especially in that geriatric population, when it comes to things like mental health and psychiatric care. I usually try to use phrases like coping skills, therapeutic services, or independent living skills. Things like that have a little bit less of a taboo placed on them, and people generally receive those more, they just receive them better. But again, we do have to make sure that this top part is filled out for it to be a valid consent. So after they sign the consent, you can come back and fill out this first page yourself. You're going to figure out what their mental health symptoms are. Again, you can usually find a diagnosis on the face sheet, but if it's not on the face sheet, just talk to your point of contact. And then you're going to fill this out as needed. So for example, you're going to go ahead and put in the client's name, what services you think that they qualify for, the name of the person making the referral, and the referral date. And then you're going to check any current mental health symptoms. So again, for example, oversexualized behavior and psychotic behavior. Those specifically are 2 symptoms that if you say that to a resident, they might get very defensive or say, I've never done that. Well, we want to make sure that we're not aggravating anyone or causing any behaviors while we're consenting. As we know, almost everyone in a mental health facility or a long-term care facility is going to have some type of behavior or mental health diagnosis. You have to think they're living in a place they've never lived before. It's a very different environment than they've been living in for most of their life. And with that can come things like anxiety, depression, mood swings. Even something as little as insomnia or sleep disturbance can qualify someone for services. So you'll go through and check whatever the mental health symptoms that they currently have are. And then you would go ahead and list the presenting problem and what the desired outcome would be. With this, again, you are not showing this portion to the resident. You are keeping this portion to yourself and filling it out privately or with your point of contact at the facility. And the nice thing with this is even if they don't currently have a diagnosis, once we get them on caseload and we do an assessment, we're most likely going to be able to come up with a diagnosis, or maybe they don't even need a full diagnosis. They just need someone to talk to. We may work with a resident who is having anxiety. We might work with a resident who's having over-sexualized behavior. We might work with a resident who is just having trouble sleeping. We see such a wide range of concerns in the mental health world that having this form can really help our clinicians during that first assessment figure out how they're going to want to approach this client or what they're going to talk to this client about. As you can guess, you would probably approach someone with over-sexualized behavior a little differently than you would approach someone who just has a sleep disturbance. So this is invaluable information to our clinicians when they come in and do these assessments as well. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing now. Okay, perfect. The other thing to keep in mind when working in facilities is in addition to providing your amazing clinical services, we also want to make sure that we're providing great customer service to the facility staff. The facilities are our clients. They are our partners, so we need to make sure that we are working and having really good communication with the staff at the facility. Ultimately, the facility are the ones who get to decide whether or not we're able to provide those services there. Even if we're providing amazing clinical services, if we're lacking on that communication aspect with the facility staff and they're not made aware of the progress or good things that are being done and provided regular updates, they're not going to know what's going on and they might decide that they want to terminate our contract and go with a different provider. And then ultimately, we have a team of clinicians that we're scrambling to find another place for. So it is equally as important that we're providing great customer service to our facilities, in addition to the already amazing clinical services, because that's why we are able to have our jobs is by keeping our contracts and these facilities happy. Keep in mind that if there is ever any issues or concerns that come up with a facility that you're not sure about or that make you uncomfortable or whatever the situation may be, definitely check in with your supervisor and team lead, and they'll be more than happy to work with you on how to solve that problem or even loop in your local development team as well. Something else to keep in mind that's a little bit difficult working at facilities is that they do often have a lot of turnover. And that can be a little bit frustrating because maybe you built a great rapport with that social worker or the director of nursing and you had a good process in place and things were going great. And then all of a sudden, you show up to work one day and that social worker is no longer there, or the entire team is no longer there, or the facility was bought by another corporation and they have an entirely new team in the building. All of a sudden, you might have to adjust or figure out how this new team is going to want communication to take place. Please keep in mind that we do have to be flexible with our facilities because every facility and every administrator and every social worker is going to have different preferences. So maybe previously you were involved in biweekly meetings and now they want to have weekly meetings, or they want to have a once a month meeting with the entire team. We just want to make sure that we are meeting them where they're at and trying to keep them as informed as they are asking to be. Each facility is going to have a different preference and operate differently. And it can be frustrating when you have new staff come in because these preferences may change. But being able to be flexible and be creative in how we're approaching our new staff or new facilities is going to be so imperative to keeping our contracts happy. If you ever have any questions about any of your facilities, or if you need any guidance on navigating any facility issues, definitely reach out to your supervisor and team lead. And then you can also feel free to reach out to your local development coordinator as well. If you're unsure who your local development coordinator is, you can always ask your supervisor, or you can speak to our VP of Development, Kayla Bell. You're able to find her information in the ViQuest address book, so you can just go ahead and search up her name. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video today, and best of luck in the facilities. You're going to do great.